That was the sound of Burn, the anthem which unleashed the new sound of Deep Purple Mark III on A Waiting World. It's now over 30 years since we first heard the new lineup, and Burn still sells in huge numbers and causes heated debate even today. This is the independent, critical review of that album and the band that made it. We pose the thorny question, is this a masterpiece heralding a new dawn, or merely an imposter setting a course which would see Deep Purple hurtling down a blind alley?
This was much more direct album, very, very heavy, very sustainable, right in your face blues.
It showed a lot of different aspects to the way they handled themselves as that lineup.
There are great tracks on every album, but Burn's not really my particular favourite.
Don't forget, you're changing the lead singer of one of the biggest rock and roll bands in the world. He's going. What do you do?
Got these diehards that were affronted that, you know, someone else came in and took over from their beloved Ian Gillan and Roger Glover. Well, this was just, you know, what they needed to say, wow, it's all rubbish, isn't it?
The behaviour and the attitude of people in the 70s, and especially mine, was maybe a little tweaked. But I was still a very young lad. I was 21 when I joined Deep Purple.
He wasn't naturally comfortable in that position, so the band were fragmenting and all over the place, and in reality they went on too long.
Every job has its Monday morning, you know, and ours just happens to come on Saturday night, that's all.
Bless you. Thank you.
Burn was released in 1974, at a time when Purple were already masters of all they surveyed. Here's how they got there. With that wall of sound, Deep Purple Mark II announced their arrival as the unchallenged masters of heavy rock. The album that brought them to prominence was, of course, In Rock. It was this amazing record which told a waiting world that something new and powerful had been born.
First incarnation of Deep Purple had a hit called Hush. It was a pop hit, and they were sort of like a popish, rockish band. Dare I say it, a little bit a la Sweet. So when they decided to abandon that, they just suddenly said, no, we're going to do something different. And I think that was quite a hard decision. So I think when they came out with Deep Purple in Rock, it was a brave decision, and it was the right decision, and I think it really worked.
They brought Roger Glover in on bass and Ian Gillan in on vocals, and Roger Glover had been doing some session work for them, but seemed to have a much more handle on intuitively of passages and where they were going. And Gillan was much more of your hard rock vocal type, you know, a huge guy with a huge voice, lots of hair, just looked like a rock singer. And I think that's what encouraged them to really forge away, much like Zeppelin and Sabbath. I mean, they were the three big sort of rock acts in the 70s.
That was the album that transformed them into that. You know, I think it was all a bit wishy-washy before. Nobody really knew what was happening with them. But that was the record that put them on the map, really.
Every time you talk to people who know the history of rock and metal, they stand back in awe and go, in rock. And it is an absolutely monstrous album.
I mean, it just opens with this wall of noise, and steamrollers into Speed King, which really, for the, you know, that was thrash metal of its day. If you think about it, such a bombastic, frenetic song, you know, all that noise, and then charges headfirst into this sort of apocalyptic riff. It's like a rhino aimed at your testicles, isn't it? It's like.
I just think the band were great at that time, and that it was recorded at the right time for them. It captured the spirit of what they were trying to do.
From the likes of Speaking all the way through to the incredible Child in Time, which is an epic of absolutely gigantic proportions, which every time you hear it just makes you think, how on earth did Ian Gillan hit those notes?
See the blind man, yeah, he's shooting at the world, bullets flying, oh, taking toll. If you feel bad, Lord.
With Purple Mark II now established, Fireball, the second studio album, continued the tradition. It didn't shine with the same brilliance as In Rock, but the ingredients were all there to keep things moving forward to the next almighty album, Machine Head.
Machine Head is the masterpiece for Mark II. In Rock got very close, and it still stands as an album 99.9% of all bands would love to have recorded, but Machine Head just took it slightly further forward.
It's a terrific record. Yeah, it's one of the all-time great heavy rock records of the 70s, if not of all time.
It was such a complete record. It was just very well produced. It was really well put together, and all the songs and material was very, very strong.
At that time, they could do no wrong. And maybe that was it. Maybe they, slowly but surely, they started to realise they could do no wrong until things started to drift apart, you know.
Despite all of the fame and success, all was not well in the Purple camp. Real animosity had raised its ugly head, and there were serious cracks appearing in the relationships.
Richie Blackmore is a genius guitar player, right? But he's not the easiest people to work with. Anyone will tell you that. They'll all tell you that the guy's a genius. He's a mischief maker in a good way, but he is also a very difficult person to get on with.
I'm still very moody, shy, and very honest, which a lot of people can't take, you know. Honest? Yeah, and which is the hardest thing in this business is sincerity. Once you can fake that, you're laughing, you know.
Blackmore to me was a great leader of a band, although some things were the behavioural department and all of us were stupid. But he ran that band pretty much the way he wanted to run it, whether it was immature or not. It showed truth, arrogance, and somewhat of a genius to do that. So I only have great things to say about him.
My theory has always been the singer is a little bit, shall we say, envious of the fact that the guitarist, the lead guitarist, gets the musical respect. The guitarist is always envious that the singer is the pin-up boy, the rock star in the band, and there's always this tension and conflict. And when you've got two such strong personalities of Richie Blackmore and Ian Gillan, who I don't think ever really understood each other or wanted to understand each other, you get the clash.
Woman from Tokyo was about the only bright spot on the final studio album by the Deep Purple Mark II lineup. The ill-starred Who Do We Think We Are? With material as poor as this, it was obvious that matters were finally coming to a head.
Quite frankly, the last album that Deep Purple recorded with the Mark II lineup was rightly referred to by Roger Glover as a shit record. Gillan had enough and decided he was going to quit. Wrote him a letter and buggered off to sing the lead role in Jesus Christ Superstar.
And Blackmore didn't care. Okay, go, bye. And Roger Glover went with Ian Gillan because I think they had always been a pair. They came into the band as a pair, and I think they worked so well together that when his cohort, as it were, left, I think Roger Glover felt, well, I've got no real reason to stay here either, so I'll go.
For me, that was the end of the band. They never ever regained that magic.
It's not often that one of the biggest names in rock finds itself 2 members short at a time when they are one of the biggest box office draws on the planet. But that's exactly what happened to Deep Purple.
Obviously they were looking around. They weren't going to call it a day. They'd lost a bassist and a singer before, and they carried on. So I'm sure that they thought at this particular juncture in time, there's no reason why we can't do it again.
Richie Blackmore was toying with the ideas of dual vocals, having 2 vocal strengths in there. Possibly some of the combat that they had in directional sense, Gillan and Blackmore, was exactly because of that. Gillan saw himself as, well, I'm the singer, I'm the vocalist, that's how it is, this is my delivery. And Blackmore wanted to expand that somewhat. And after Gillan had gone, he was already looking at Glenn Hughes, bass vocalist who was with Trapeze.
That asked me a few times, or sort of hinted, in Los Angeles and in London. Richie asked me once and John asked me again. Sort of hinted, and then they were playing in New York with Gillan and Glover. And when they asked me to join them, I thought it was Gillan that was leaving, and I was going to ask to be sing and play bass. At first I said no, because I had no intention of not being able to sing. Even at a very early age I had a specific thing I wanted to do, and that was singing. But then they dropped the bomb on me that they wanted to ask, and they'd already asked Paul Rodgers, a friend of mine now, who I thought, and still do, I think Paul's an amazing singer. So the idea of singing with Paul Rodgers, and I'd let them know, yeah, I'll join, only if I can sing some things with Paul or whoever the singer you choose.
I have to say that there are probably two geniuses who were associated with Deep Purple, Richie Blackmore being one, obviously the other is Glenn Hughes. This man has so much talent, it's too good. This man is the equivalent of a George Best in football, or the equivalent of Muhammad Ali. So talented, he almost took it for granted.
Glenn Hughes is a fantastic musician and a great singer. That guy's got a wonderful voice. But I wonder if that was the right gig for him. I mean, he's a lead singer. He's a real frontman, and I don't know if he really fitted into that role that Roger did so well.
The other new member was a complete unknown from Redcar in the northeast of England, called David Coverdale.
I auditioned Deep Purple last year in August. No, it was...
Presumably you're nearer normality than them. I mean, they've been living in this fantasy world for so many years. Presumably the contrast between...
I've always had the fantasy there,
Sorry?
I've always wanted, I've known what it was about, I just wanted to, instead of standing outside the door, I wanted to get in.
And you're happy now you're there?
I'm very happy, yeah. Right.
I think they did the right thing. They didn't try and replace Gillan with another Gillan. Gillan was a heavy metal shouter, great voice, but a heavy metal shouter. Coverdale sang the blues.
He's about as close at the time as you could find to Paul Rodgers, who was also from the northeast. He came out of nowhere, really. How they stumbled, a stroke of genius, I think, to dig out David Coverdale at the time.
He's massively underrated, actually. I think what he's done has been exceptional, but I think for anyone to try and step into a vacant space left by Ian, it's impossible. He is a totally unique singer.
Together, the new team began the task of forging a new Deep Purple. From the outset, it was obvious that with 2 singers in the band, the sound would be radically different.
I think Purple actually, if anything, got a bit slicker. They sounded, if anything, slightly more American.
You do what you do to the best of your ability, then the audience puts you into a category. You don't. They say, well, these are now a heavy rock band, this is a nice folk band. You don't say that.
With Ian Gillan, it was very much one voice, and they had to write and tailor for his voice. Now, a great voice, absolutely a great voice, very much a screaming powerhouse of a voice. With David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes, you had Glenn, who could do incredible soaring vocals, and Coverdale was much richer and slightly deeper. It allowed the band to expand. Perfect example being Burn.
In Mark II, each album had a classic song. It would open with, Speed King. There was a classic song in there somewhere that you'll always, And I think "Burn" the song itself is definitely one of those. At the time, I remember hearing it when it first came out, and I was absolutely blown away by the sound. Just to hear these two voices working together, it's fantastic. It is.
It is probably the second greatest riff that Deep Purple ever came up with after Smoke on the Water. It's frighteningly good. The kind of sort of the demonic imagery of the lyrics, brutal vocal from Coverdale, offset by much more melodic kind of approach from Glenn Hughes. Immediately you can see how these two great vocalists are going to work together. It's absolutely fantastic.
She got Coverdale singing most of the time, but every so often Hughes would come in with those, they're not screams, they're soaring vocals, which allowed the band to actually open up a little bit, and really does show David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes working together wonderfully well as, shall we say, co-vocalists.
The original album featured 8 tracks. 5 of them were to make it into the Purple stage set, a surprisingly high percentage for a brand new lineup. 2 of the tracks were all-time classics. There was Burn, of course, and then there's the majestic sound of the blues-driven Mistreated, written by Ritchie Blackmore and new boy David Coverdale.
I've been mistreated.
Mistreated works in the context of the album, I think. Probably not if you go back to the previous Mark II songs. It's quite different. It's more very blues edged. I mean, it's a great track. I mean, the guitar part alone. Yet Mr. Blackmore showing off how to write an easy lick. And you think he apparently used to come out with thousands of them. Just sift through another riff from Blackmore. But it's a great song. It's very haunting as well. The guitar solo in there is fantastic.
This is the only song that Black has played to me in his house prior to Coverdale joining. David wasn't even in the frame. First time I ever went to Richie's house, there was 2 guitars in a room, and he bass and a guitar, and he said, I want you to listen to this one idea I have for what was to become the Burn album. The very first idea, Without the Man, and he played the opening things to Mistreated, and I immediately started playing my style of bass playing, which is half-time, and it's the swagger, and it's not the notes I play, it's again the notes I don't play. And I knew it then at that point we were going to make a record more suited to what I was hoping it would be, more bluesier, which Blackmore really liked. And he didn't want to make a Gillan type record. So for me, participating in the track Mistreated was great.
Then Mistreated is Mark III's Child in Time. It's brilliant. It's all bluesy guitar playing from Blackmore. And the way it opens up, that sort of, call and respond guitar playing that he's doing. And then, just this absolute awesome performance from Coverdale on his first ever album. It's like, where the hell did this guy get this from? And it's you just listen to that and they made the right choice with David Coverdale.
The one thing about Purple when they do songs like Mistreated is that they manage to give them a real live feel. They don't. In those days, production didn't outweigh the song. I think that nowadays people get into production and it all becomes a production piece. But I think in those days, it was really about how well you played the song. And I think Mistreated, they played it really well. And the production's very much within sympathy of what the song sounds like. So it came across as a very live feel, and it had a great groove to it, I think, and I think it was very well sung.
Mistreated is an interesting song because it proves the worth of David Coverdale to Mark III. Now, it's one of the standout tracks on the Burn album, and I've seen and heard Glenn Hughes in recent times sing that song by himself without David Coverdale. It does not work because his voice is not right for the song. He does a very good job. It makes you appreciate what David Coverdale did because it's a bluesy song. Even the lyrics are "been mistreated." It's very much a bluesy type of lyric. And it really did allow Coverdale to showcase in the band what he was all about, the bluesy hard rock that he felt most at home with.
It perfectly sits with his vocal style. You know, it's the type of song he feels more comfortable doing. Again, you know, in a live situation, I think he may have felt a little uncomfortable with the older, the pre-him, the Gillan Purple stuff. So sometimes those songs didn't sit very well, but here it's like, you know, it's putting on your favourite shirt. I think, you know, it's like, bang, this is where I'm at. And his delivery on it is like incredible. And, you know, it just that whole bluesy vibe from it. But it's just one of those things that when you're perfectly within your range, you're perfectly within your style, and you feel completely comfortable with it, you excel. And this is a point, certainly in Mistreated, where Coverdale excels, you know.
The rest of the material on the album doesn't scale the heights of the two epic tracks, which have guaranteed the album its classic status. There was also a possibility that there were a couple of fillers on the album. Take What's Going On Here, for example.
Well, What's Going On Here, I think, is a bit of a filler, personally. It's probably the weakest song on Burn. I mean, you know, hope we're not here. But it's not particularly the greatest song. I think that, you know, maybe it was a filler.
Deep Purple only wrote enough songs for each record. We never did, like I write 25 songs now or whatever. What's Going On Here was probably rehearsed as we did it in Montreux that day, and we just came up with lyrics in the Stones mobile unit. Kind of a throwaway song, but it's a song that Richie kind of enjoyed, that bluesy approach.
You know, they must have sat and thought, like, you know, I know he can sing and he knows he can sing, and so they just had fun with the track. So I think from that point of view, maybe it was a filler. If you look at the album as a whole, as a fan, from their point of view, it was probably just a bit of fun that they put in. But it's a really good song.
I don't think there is a filler track on Burn, unless might be the instrumental from Blackmore, but even that I find hugely enjoyable.
You know, the thing is, I tend not to look at any songs as filler tracks. They all have something good about them. So it's not so much that they're filler tracks as I think that other tracks shine. So that, you know, you have highs and sort of not so highs, and I think maybe that's not one of their most high points.
In the same way that a drummer, unfussy but steady, is necessary sometimes in a band of virtuosos, because you need to actually meld together an album in the same way that you put together a team, or the same way you put together a band. They have to complement each other. Not everyone can be a virtuoso showing off all the time.
I completely understand that as they got funkier, fans of the more sort of heavy rock approach of Deep Purple are going to get a bit more put off. But let's face it, I mean, they didn't turn into a funk band. They were still heavy rock. They just had a funky or more soulful edge to it.
Although he doesn't actually receive a writing credit on the album, it was clear that Glenn Hughes was keen to push the band further into a soul-funk direction.
He's not going to suddenly join Deep Purple and say, I'm going to become something completely different now, because he had a strong personality, was used to leading trapeze, was acclaimed everywhere he went as a wonder boy. which he was and still is. So he had that influence. He brought it into Byrne, but it was complemented by the fact that you had Blackmore's influence still very much to the fore.
I don't want to make any rock fan feel comfortable in my whole career. I've always tried to press a button to make them evoke a feeling of, what's this? I cannot sing traditionally straight ahead rock because my brain doesn't operate like that. I've been given a gift to sing with a sense of security and emotion that is deeper than most rock singers. Hence they call my voice soulful, and I find regular rock singing to be tedious and boring. I like to keep the melody, but what I sing is not your traditional kind of hard rock, and I don't want to be compared to Ian Gillan at all.
There are Purple fans out there that just won't accept it. They don't want to hear that. So it doesn't matter. You can argue with them till you're blue in the face, but they've got a party line and they stick to it. Well, it's their loss, I'm afraid.
We don't construct our songs like, say, Rodgers and Hart used to, or Lennon and McCartney, even. They're sort of amalgams of what everyone is able to
from a certain basic idea.
Ian might come up with a sort of a drum rhythm. So he came up with a drum pattern. You Fall No one. It's opening track on side 2 of Byrne. Came purely and simply, initially, from a drum rhythm that Ian thought up.
Whereby Might Just Take Your Life came from an organ chord sequence that John had. So you start with the basic, simple little idea, then you get 5 minds saying, well, I think this would fit with that. That's what we do.
But
that's maybe why they're not too melodic, they're not too lyrical.
We're a rock band. I don't like the term hard rock. I don't like the term heavy metal. I'd like to think of ourselves as a rock and roll band.
When Byrne came out, he was raved about it by a lot of people. I think people understood what Deep Purple were trying to do. So the critics picked up and ran with it to a large extent, and I think they appreciated Purple were changing. They weren't the band who made Machine Head and in rock, but you don't repeat yourself. Or if you do, you run the risk of people saying, oh, we've heard this all before, this is boring, move on.
It's sort of gone like that, to us. We've gone up and then taken 1 step back, then 3 steps, then 1 back, in terms of the albums.
You can't deny that Purple weren't stagnating to a certain extent with the previous lineup, and this new lineup sounded fresh, revitalised, energetic, hungry.
Had they considered critics and fans and everybody else, it might have been less of an album. Maybe they wouldn't have got the vocalist as quickly. Maybe it would have changed the dynamic of the album. But because they didn't worry about considering anybody, Richie looked at what he wanted, got the right people in. They went straight into write. They got the album and went straight out to play. It was like bang, 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 bang. It's just like there you are. Let's do it. It didn't give anybody a chance to go like, well, actually, they just were like, oh my God. And the response was like, wow.
Overall reaction to the album was very positive. Might Just Take Your Life worked well with its smoky Hammond organ introduction by John Lord. You Fool No One clearly had potential as a live number, but the time had come to test the material against an audience.
When you're recording, you find that there's one engineer and a couple of T-boys around, and it doesn't really inspire you to turn out your best. Whereas when you're on stage, you're playing to the people and they inspire you, obviously. I suppose it's an ego thing, really. You like to kind of basically show them what you know, and you get really inspired. You get a real exciting thing going with the crowd, because they just turn you on.
They had a mindset that was, this is not just about what we do in the studio and special effects and clever technology. This is about being able to take what we do out of the studio and put it on stage. And You Fool No One, as with every other song on Burn or subsequent or previous albums from Deep Purple, was a song that easily translated into the live environment and, like everyone else, came alive.
It had that most amazing drum pattern and bass line in it, you know. I mean, every drummer tries to copy that when they're just warming up. You never hear it played in a song anywhere these days, but it's, you know, they all seem to be able to play it now, you know.
It's a tricky song to do on stage. I think it's a tricky song, probably a tricky song they had to do in a record. So those sort of songs, they either really fly out of the box at the night or they don't. It just depends how a band are firing. I think if a band's not having a really good night, songs like that tend to suffer, because I think you've really got to be on it timing-wise, etc. And if you're not really on it, it tends to be a little bit grey.
That song could stretch out for 15 minutes some night, like Space Trucking or The Mule or whatever from Mark II. You Fool No One, as with my songs today, they grow. I don't like the idea of going on stage. Sometimes it's okay to make a 3-minute song 3 minutes, but I might stretch things out because it's the kind of era I come from. I like to push myself, and I insist on my band doing that. That's what happened in Deep Purple.
I think it was just maybe a bit too much of a stretch for Deep Purple to, you know, it's much more funk, you know. It's a bit too bright in a way, you know. It just doesn't feel, there's no real weight behind it. Just didn't quite sit right with the set. I think that's probably the best thing to say.
I love Lay Down, Stay Down. I think it's a really good, it's a great live song, and it's like one of those songs that makes you laugh, you know, it makes you smile. It's got that really good feel, you know. I always think that it's really, Ian Pace really kicks out on it, and I think that's, you know, when a drummer's really kicking out, it makes you go, yeah, that's really good. I think that's, to me, that's one of those songs that does that.
As Mistreated was a slow blues burner, this was the other end of it, 12-bar, fast-paced, you know, bang, it was rock and roll, complete rock and roll, you know, obviously with that Blackmore hard rock guitar edge to it, works incredibly well. Fast, you know, it was fast and it was up there and it was in your face, and it was great juxtaposition in the set with some of those slower, more heavier, plodding sounds. Yeah, I think it worked absolutely great track. Yeah.
It's definitely suited where Mark III were at with what, you know, what they were trying to do on the Burn album and the tour and everything. I think it was it showed a lot of different aspects to the way they handled themselves as that lineup. So yeah, it was an important song.
You had two great singers busting their lungs, trying to give it their very best shot. How is that not going to sound absolutely awesome live? Certainly, these guys could cut it live. You know, they're just on stage and giving it their all. You know, they brought this youthful, funky swagger to the band. You know, they were having a ball.
Once again, it signifies the Hughes and Coverdale double lead vocal thing. The whole record smacks of the two. I think we were the only band from England that were doing the two lead singer thing, and you can't take that away. It's 30 years ago, and it really, my God, it's 32 years ago. It just holds up amazingly.
Lay Down, Stay Down was one of those numbers on Burn that had the Coverdale hallmark that he subsequently took on with Whitesnake, because it had that, not double entendre because it wasn't that clever, but it had that feeling of being about sexual contrast, groupies, etc., and that rock and roll lifestyle. And it was a very good live number as well, because it had a really good groove and a good swing to it, and the band seemed to enjoy playing it. We certainly got the feeling that Glenn Hughes and David Coverdale thoroughly enjoyed playing the Burn songs live, more than they did the earlier stuff.
At some stage, Purple Mark III had to knuckle down to the fact that there was a huge audience out there who wanted to hear the classic Purple songs like Space Trucking.
Oh, we had a lot of love for Peter. We always have a ball on board. We're meeting all the groovy people. We walk the Milky Way so far. We dance around with Borealis. The space trucking round the storm. Come on! Come on! Come on! Let's go space trucking! Come on! Come on! Come on! Yeah!
And obviously, right, you're new to a band, you've written an album and it's a great album, then you're really keen to convey your new material. But you've got a whole load of old material that you also have to sort of get across. Some of that material is going to work, and some of it just isn't.
It's always difficult for any musician or vocalist to come into an established band and suddenly find that they have to perform the old guys' songs. Black Sabbath, Ronnie James Dio, he never really did justice to the Ozzy era because it wasn't right for him. You think of Brian Johnson with AC/DC trying to do the Bon Scott era stuff. Again, same problem. Deep Purple faced this problem with David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes because the classics from the Mark II era, Ian Gillan and Roger Glover era, were written with them and with them in mind.
And you don't want to just mimic what the guy did before because everybody will attack you, so you want to sort of do them your way and then everybody's going to attack you. So you're sort of caught between an in-rock and a hard place.
I don't particularly like playing old songs from other bands. I considered the band before I joined Deep Purple was Mark II to be another band. I never really, never felt comfortable performing Gillan songs or anybody else I've asked to do, because I want to have my own thing. I don't know, it's okay. I mean, I didn't really enjoy singing a lot of that stuff. I don't think David did either, and if you ask him the same question, I think he'll give you the same answer.
Well, I only saw that lineup live on one occasion. It was a great show. But the older material didn't work for me. Didn't have the classic magic.
There was a lot of criticism at the time when Mark III were going out and covering, basically covering the old stuff. It's unfair because every new lineup of a band has a different way of approaching a song. And for example, Smoke on the Water.
There's a tune. Smoke on the Water. It's one of those, that's an Ian Gillan song. No one else can really do justice to that number. He wrote it, he was there at the event, although it's Rich's riff, and it's the classic guitar intro riff. No one else can sing that song.
Smoke in the Water, to me, every time you saw it performed, by Mark III was going through the motions. We have to put it in because people expect it. Now, Blackmore enjoyed it, or seemed to enjoy it when he was in the mood, and being the moody sort of person he was, it was not always. Coverdale especially felt very uncomfortable with it. It was a sort of song where he thought, I'd rather not do this because it's not mine and it doesn't belong to me and it's not part of who I am or what I am, but I've got no choice. This is Deep Purple. Therefore, we have to do Smoke on the Water.
Okay, I'll sing Smoke on the Water and I'll sing it with the same melody as Ian, but I'll put my thing on it. And you know, I would never perform it again because I believe it's an Ian Gillan song, you know, and I think, you know, he should sing that song and nobody should sing it because, you know, I think it's kind of cheesy for anybody else to do things like that. I want to leave the classics alone, if you will.
Fundamentally, the guys backing it, with the exception of bass duties, which are now being handled by Glenn Hughes, pretty straightforward basing to that root notation, so there's not a lot that he could destroy about it, so as long as you stick close to that. So then you're left with just vocal, that's the difference. You know, you've got two more than capable rock vocalists trying to fill in for a very powerful rock vocal as well, so you know, that's what you're left down to, and again it's down to the listener, really, I suppose.
I've never heard a live version with Coverdale singing that's been anywhere near as good as live versions with Ian Gillan. Was there as much passion going into the older and expected classics? Unfortunately, I suspect there probably wasn't. Even though I've heard various sort of Purple live tapes of the time where, you know, they do more than justice to most of the older material that they sang. But you know, this is the fuel to the fire of people that don't want to accept that the new lineup was any good.
Although there is much to recommend the Mark III lineup, ultimately this period was to prove distinctly unsatisfactory. Stormbringer, the follow-up album, was lackluster in the extreme.
I think Stormbringer didn't really bring a storm along, did it at all, really? It was sort of little guffaw in the distance. It compared to Burn, it didn't even compare, I don't think. It was a lot mellower as a record. A lot more funky, a bit more soulful, but didn't have the impact of Burn.
I think Stormbringer was summed up best by John Lord once, who said that by the time they went into the studio to do the album, Richie Blackmore had lost interest. He was already writing material for the first Rainbow album and didn't really have that commitment anymore, and I think it shows in the album.
Richie was suggesting a particular track that nobody really wanted to cover, and Glenn was bringing his own stuff in, which was much more funk soul, funk based, and you know, so I think it was one of those albums that the writings sort of started to move in their own directions, you know, not to mean that they were egotistical. I'm sure there was a lot of ego involved, but certainly it was into a more private realm than a Purple realm, that maybe a bit more personal to each member, going, oh, I'd like to do this, and oh, I'd like to do this, and whereas you know, the album before was like Purple through and through. You know, if you sliced it in two, it would say Deep Purple inside, like a stick of rock.
People listen to Stormbringer, please listen. Richie Blackmore is damn funky, whether he likes it or not. He played wonderfully on the album. I think at this point he'd had enough of playing. He'd lost his foothold, I think, as far as we were going in a more band direction, as far as Coverdale, Lord, Pace and Hughes we were going in a new direction, you know, we were growing. Every artist grows. When you take Gillan and Glover out of the scenario, Gillan and Glover are pretty much traditional hard rockers. Coverdale and Hughes were now groovier, soulful rock guys, more influenced by Americans. That's why you have things on Stormbringer like You Can't Do It Right and Holy Man and Hold On. You know, they're more grown-up stuff.
There are times when I feel like just saying, oh, let's forget it, you know, let's all go home, and we've all got enough money to just say, well, I'll do another LP when I feel like doing it. Because really that's what every group should do. But every group is pressured by the record company. It's only guarding their own interests. A group only lasts a certain length of time, so they get the most out of them. It doesn't matter whether they fold up in 5 years, as long as they made about 10 LPs in the meantime. Whereas in actual fact, to get the best out of a group, you've got to give them a year for each LP, I would think, for an actual progression without forcing it. And that really bugs me, actually, going to the studio. Right, we're going to turn out an LP, boys. You know, here we go, blah, blah, blah. I've got to write a song today, you know. It's just ridiculous, you know. Yeah. And I don't know if I've got the guts to do it, but I've often thought, that's it. I'd like to leave, not the band, I just want to get out of the business, play when I feel like playing, and do a record when I feel like recording. It would be fantastic, but you can't have it all your own way, you know.
I think the cracks have started to show, and it was a great album cover, wasn't it? I think the cracks were already there, and I think it was becoming a job.
Within the year, Blackmore had gone, taking the creative heart of the band with him. In his absence, Purple drafted in Tommy Bolin and struggled on for one more record. But with huge drug problems, chaotic stage shows and an indifferent album, John Lord and Ian Pace pulled the plug on the whole sorry, floundering edifice.
They couldn't carry on anyway with the state that Tommy Bolin, who'd replaced Richie Blackmore, and Glenn Hughes had got themselves into with narcotics. You know, they were a mess. I think the final gig was up in Liverpool. You know, Coverdale was in tears. He knew it was going to be the final gig, and Hughes didn't know what planet he was on, and Bolin could hardly play.
Tommy Bolin, who they'd brought in as a guitarist to replace Richie Blackmore, hadn't unveiled his addiction to, I think it was heroin, and that exposed itself on the tour, and they just couldn't corral the pair of them. It was just going like an animal, and you know, the shows were hit and miss, and certainly the last one they did, which was a shambles, made them all decide that's it. I think Coverdale was very unhappy, and Lord and Pace just decided let's just call it a day there. It was right to stop at that time.
I'm not going to tell you that we had a great time, Tommy and I, cavorting around the globe, stoned, because it wasn't great. But I said there are other issues that broke the band up, which probably nobody wants to talk about, and I won't talk about it either. But there's a lot of bizarre things going on there. I was glad when it was over. I wanted to get away. I was tired. I didn't want to make another record of unfocused rock music. You know, 3 albums is enough. 3 albums and 2 live albums is enough.
You do seriously feel an immense necessity to be good. And it stems from the fact that you are being paid by a lot of people to excel. And to excite them. And if you know you're not doing it, I get so brought down, you know, it's amazing how just doomy you can get.
My feeling with Deep Purple is that they should have split up after Burn. With all due respect to Glenn and David, I know they did Stormbringer with that lineup as well, and then Tommy Bolin, a very talented man, came in. The problem was that things were falling apart after Burn anyway. Richie Blackmore had lost interest. He was already starting to think about his next project, Rainbow, and there was no leader anymore.
With a distance of over 30 years behind us, Burn has certainly had time to bed down into the consciousness of the Purple legend. So what is the critical assessment of the album today?
Is Burn a classic album? I think yes, it's a classic album, because it had a huge effect on me personally at the time, just because of the vocal range, and there's 3 or 4 classic songs on there, so that's good enough.
In hindsight, you know, there's those who would look back and say In Rock is the Purple album, but for the most part, people tend to look at Burn and say, wow, I mean, that's just what a classic Purple album. On all levels, the performance and the track list had a clutch of hits. It was a new approach. still staying in that hard rock frame, but just adding another dimension completely with Hughes and Coverdale coming in vocally, the strength of Hughes as a musician as well.
Yes, it is a classic album because it's full of great tunes, it's very well played, it's really well produced, and it's a full package again. For me, it's like Machine Head. They actually followed an album with another great album. That's really hard, and they changed the lineup in the middle. My God, that's unbelievably hard. I mean, really hard thing to do. So I think in the end, you know, they did a really good job. You know, it's a lot to be said to Ritchie and John Lord and Ian Pace, because they obviously, you know, did a lot of help and direction to the other two. You know, they saw what had gone and they pushed them in the direction they wanted to go, and it's brilliant. It's a brilliant job.
I think it's a classic album without a doubt. It's my personal favourite, and like as I've said, I think that Burn rightly stands as number 2 to Machine Head's number 1 in Deep Purple's body of work.
Burn is a classic as an album because it's cohesive. Every song stands in its own right. The performance is at the top of its game. Every one of those guys performed brilliantly on it, and there's a significant commitment from them as well. He's listened to the record now and you know they wanted to make the album, not contractual obligations. You don't have one guy taking the band in a certain direction with the rest of them sitting there going, we don't want to do this. But the main reason I think is that every song is truly a masterpiece.
Burn, Machine Head, in rock seem to centre around a specific kind of theme. Not even a theme you can put into words. But they hang together. You know it's part of that album, and it feels part of that album. And you can play the album from A to Z without thinking, oh, that sticks out like a sore thumb.
I think the record smacks of a very, very highly intelligent rock band of the 1970s. We have a top 5 record across the world. We'd already probably outsold Who Do You Think We Are, which was the one before it. But I'm proud of the work I did in Deep Purple.
You